slavery was deeply entrenched in the South. But in the North, it was a different story.
The North becomes increasingly mechanized. We see the emergence of a factory system. You have an increasingly industrialized North. There's less need for as many physical hands.
The North do see a slave-based economy as part of the past. It's not where America is moving.
By 1860, tensions over slavery had reached a fever pitch. And things escalated further when Abraham Lincoln was elected president.
Lincoln was morally opposed to slavery. The white South fear that he will use his power to bring about the emancipation of the slaves and the destruction of their entire way of life. This is the point of no return.
Convinced that the government would do all in its power to abolish slavery and sever the institution that drove their booming economy, 11 southern states broke away from the North.
Together, they form a new country, the Confederate States of America.
It has its own currency, its own government.
And they make a new flag, a Confederate flag. For the United States, these individuals are traitors. They have torn the Union apart.
The Civil War had begun. It would embroil America in a deadly battle, bringing into doubt its very survival.
The question of slavery will now be settled in what became the nation's bloodiest war.
There is no doubt that slavery was the fundamental cause of the war, but the abolition of slavery was not Lincoln's priority. That was preservation of the Union.
The nation, in world historical terms, isn't even a toddler yet, right? And so the idea that it could, in fact, be riven by this ideological debate is what Lincoln and many others are desperate to avoid.
Britain and France were ready to recognize the Southern Confederate States as a separate nation. Lincoln had to act.
In January 1863, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation.
This legislation declared that all slaves in active rebellion against the Union shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free.
He's saying, those individuals who are now free, you can come and join the Union and you can fight for us. This proclamation was a wartime measure. It's a war tactic.
Nearly 200,000 African Americans would answer the call to fight against the South.
Enslaved African Americans will now fight for their own freedom.
The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history.
It was brutal. It was horrific.
After 4 years of savage conflict, the Civil War finally ended in 1865. The Union had been saved, and in a landmark moment, the government passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery.
The 13th Amendment is the teeth to the Emancipation Proclamation.
The abolition of slavery is monumental.
They were no longer bound by the condition of their mothers to a life of enslavement in perpetuity.
Finally, those famous words that all men are created equal may finally actually be fulfilled.
The 13th Amendment ensured that African Americans would be forever free. But what it didn't answer was this set of thorny questions about what that freedom would actually look like.
We now have 4 million more free individuals in the United States. So what are we going to do? How do we rebuild?
In 1896, America tried to answer that question. But their answer would lead to yet more division, inequality, and bloodshed.
After the Civil War, the United States enters into a period of about 10, 12 years called the period of Reconstruction.
So Reconstruction is a partially successful experiment in securing newfound rights to former slaves, but it comes to an end prematurely because of white Southerners' determination to restore their dominion over the South.
The South lost the war, but the ideology of white supremacy was not dislodged.
And so they fight to make sure that the South remains under the rule of white supremacy.
Okay, we're all equal, but the races do need to remain separate. So the doctrine was known as separate, but equal. They needed that racial hierarchy. They needed that to be written into the law, and they did.
In 1896, a landmark case made racial segregation the law of the land for the whole of the United States.
The Supreme Court say if services are offered equally, it doesn't matter if they're racially segregated. And so you actually see a mushrooming of laws across the North and the South that begins to separate and partition the United States. One world for white individuals, another world for Black individuals. And it covers everything that you can think of. Interracial marriage is banned. You cannot work together. You cannot eat together.
We would have a Black school and a white school, and we'd have one carriage in a railway car and 9 where white people could sit. What I'm getting at here is that it was never equal. And so racial inequality finds new life.
Segregation to the average Negro means being held back. He wants to move forward in the American mainstream. Segregation holds him back.
America was now brutally divided along racial lines.
Racial segregation was humiliating and degrading. You were not one of those individuals who lived in the land of the free.
All of this would have an enormous psychological effect on the African-American population, partly because if you fell foul of particular laws, the consequences would be dire.
Intimidation and violence were used to prevent African Americans going about their everyday lives, and even from exercising their constitutional right to vote.
You could be beaten. Your house could be burned down. You could be lynched.
These are sadistic forms of violence. It's not just the physical oppression, it's the psychological oppression. That the threat of the violence was this long shadow cast over African Americans that conditioned their every move in public.
The most ruthless and notorious organization that rose up during this period was the Ku Klux Klan, who unleashed a reign of terror on the Black communities.
The Ku Klux Klan is a terrorist organization.
The mission of the Klan was the preservation of white people at the top of a racial hierarchy.
I told the mayor here if he refused to negotiate the racial issue with the members of the Klan, that we will start an economic boycott against this city.
The Klan actually reaches its greatest power in the 1920s when it has several million followers. It's so powerful that its members are able to march publicly on the streets of Washington, D.C. in front of the nation's capital.
With white supremacist organizations like the KKK and racial segregation enforced throughout the country, equality seemed impossible.
World War II is yet another turning point in this story of African American freedom.
During the war, 125,000 African American soldiers were sent abroad to fight, and what they encountered while serving sparked a revolution.
The experience of being stationed overseas is a moment of enlightenment for many African American soldiers. Be they stationed in Britain or France or Italy, they experience greater interaction between the races. They fought a war to liberate Europe, and yet they were returning home to a country that didn't bestow the same kind of rights and privileges to people of color. Many veterans, when they return home, seek to push for racial change and reform.
They initiate the Double V campaign. We will fight fascism abroad, and we will also fight racism at home. Really the precursor to what we'll see in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s.
An event on the 5th of December, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, would become the critical moment in this burgeoning movement.
Rosa Parks decided on that day in December that she would not give up her seat on the bus, as was required by racial segregation laws.
She was arrested and taken to jail, and the outcry in the Black community that such a well-known and dignified woman had been jailed sparked the Montgomery bus boycott.
For over a year, African Americans refused to use the buses in Montgomery, and they actually bankrupt the company, forcing them to come to the table to negotiate and to finally end practices of racial segregation on the buses.
Rosa Parks became known as the mother of the civil rights movement, and the Montgomery bus boycott would also place young pastor Martin Luther King at the front and center.
Martin Luther King is the icon of the civil rights movement.
He had a way to connect with the nation, to tell the nation that you are not living up to what you defined yourselves to be.
We will no longer sell our birthright of freedom for the mess of segregated pottage.
The reason that he's so iconic is because of his philosophy of nonviolence. It's an extraordinary radical move to say, we're going to fight this injustice without violence. So that contrast becomes very, very powerful.
Unlike the Civil War just a century earlier, peaceful protest would form the bedrock of the entire movement, which exploded in 1960.
Students bring a vigor and an intensity that hasn't quite been witnessed before.
The student sit-ins are simply an attempt to secure integrated seating at lunch counters across the South.
They begin to occupy spaces where they are told you are not allowed to be. And they say, we're here and we're going to stay.
People would pour drinks over their heads. They were being told to sit quietly, to not retaliate, to do nothing.
They are engaging in acts of non-violent civil disobedience. These students are actually breaking the law.
On February 27, 80 Nashville students were arrested out of over 300.
This is a new radical phase of protest, that willing to peacefully defy laws that they can withstand the worst that the white power structure can throw at them. It's that sharper-edged protest that will bring about the civil rights revolution of the 1960s.
By the late summer of 1963, more than 200,000 people marched on Washington.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please.
They gathered by the Lincoln Memorial, the very place where just 4 decades ago, the KKK had been allowed to protest. Their aim? To push through civil rights legislation and establish job equality for all.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
It's at that protest in Washington that King, standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, delivers his most famous speech, the I Have a Dream oration.
But that speech is far more than a dream. It's actually a critique of the United States. He's actually addressing the nation on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. Are African Americans free 100 years later after Abraham Lincoln first said, yes, you are free? Martin Luther King says no. The nation has not lived up to that promise. Martin Luther King really understood the potential of the United States, and he pushed the United States to live up to what the founding fathers saw for the nation.
The following year, the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, ending nearly a century of racial segregation. And the Voting Act, guaranteeing African Americans the right to exercise their vote, was passed 12 months later. It had taken over 3 centuries since the arrival of the first slaves in Jamestown to finally address the deep-seated problems that had blighted America.
You're listening to Radio Anu, the international flavor, the universal spice. Blessed love my family, it is time to step into the tiger's nest. Join me every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Tiger's Nest. Right here on Radio Anu, the international flavor, the universal spice. Hosted by the Honorable Priest Isaac. Bless them. This is Radio Anu International. Cutting and clearing, renting and tearing.
While churches rose to the sky in Europe, in 12th century Africa, they were being carved out of the ground. These Christian pilgrims in Ethiopia are on their way to worship at one of them. In these highlands, in the 12th century, Lalibela, a new king from a new dynasty, built a new holy capital. Today, Lalibela's legacy lives on in the physical splendor of the churches and the traditions of their guardian priests.
My blessed people and congregation, churches with no mud, no wood, and no cement. You cannot find anything like this in the rest of the world. You are all blessed because you are here. This place was built by God.
Every year on St. George's Day, pilgrims gather to celebrate a faith that has endured here for 16 centuries. These Christians claimed that God brought the Ark of the Covenant and the tablets of the Ten Commandments to their land. On holy days today, priests carry on their heads replicas of the tablets, wrapped in gilded cloth. The people of Ethiopia have been carving churches out of mountains for more than 1,000 years. But the 11 churches of Lalibela symbolize their achievement to the outside world. King has become a legend, his story told by monks even today.
There was a city called Roha, where lived a man who belonged to one of the most noble of families, one of the richest in gold, silver, garments, precious stones, servants and maids. He had a child who became the mysteriously named Lalibela.
In the legend, the king's greatness was recognized at birth. A swarm of bees descended on his cot as if around honey.
His mother named him Lalibela, which means the bee has recognized him as king. But these were not bodily bees, but angels who took bee form in order to announce his reign.
God sent one of his angels to bring Lalibela to heaven, to show him the most holy of churches. Lalibela, the story goes, ordered tools to be made to carve temples like those he'd seen in heaven. His craftsmen turned the wild mountainside into a new Jerusalem.
For 3,000 years, our greatest enemies came from Western Asia. They were trying to avenge the fact that they were once African colonies. You read a book called When Egypt Ruled the East, and you get some of the basic information on this. Now, the first visitors to Africa came in the 1700 BC. These were the people who would later be called Hebrews. Now, black people are ticklish on this because black people think that everything in the Bible is true. I question the intelligence of anyone who thinks everything in the Bible is true or supposed to be true. It's allegory, stories told to illustrate a point at a time when there were very few people reading books. And most of what went into the making of the Bible was copied from Egyptian texts. Now, if you want to get so dewy-eyed over the Bible, which is a carbon copy of a carbon copy, why don't you go back and read the original Egyptian text? where it started from. You see where the story of the Exodus started from. Now you can so do it. You actually think there was an Exodus. These people walked into Africa. Why couldn't they walk out? Why did they have to go by sea? Nope. Why did they see at the park? If we read Egyptian literature, you will discover that the whole story of somebody parting the street started with about 2,000 years before the New Exodus. I said, now you go into Western Asia. Let's get one thing straight, because black people are the people of all religions.
And of course, you know, we're definitely giving thanks to the life giver and the keeper of life, Emperor Haile Selassie I. Give thanks for your presence with us, oh most royal family. Give thanks you're definitely in the nest, the tiger's nest. Of course, you are listening to the voice of one John Henrik Clark, and his introduction there for us is quite, in fact, it's quite apt for the reason we're going to have this evening. But we'll get to that in a moment. Again, just giving thanks for your presence with us. And of course, you know, it's a wonderful evening. This would be the sealing program for the Tiger's Nest for this strong. And please, please forgive us for the absence of the Tiger's Nest previous evening, definitely beyond the control of our control here. But we are definitely here. And for those who are subscribers to the Tiger's Nest, you don't have to worry. We will definitely make that fully up to you. So give thanks for your patience and understanding. But we are here tonight, and I want to get a little biblical and philosophical tonight. Yeah. I was listening to a reasoning there, a discussion that our good brother Muta Baruka was having with himself. And, you know, sometimes I find the brethren's words sound to be very interesting. And I said I would like to share what he put across with the family here tonight. And he was really speaking about, what was he really speaking about? Well, of course, you know, he speaks about Haile Selassie and Rastafari, Rastaman taking Haile Selassie or taking onto themselves specific aspects of their culture that Haile Selassie never dealt with or never preached, you know, how Mutaburu stays. But this discussion, he was highlighting the 87th Psalms. Yes, he was highlighting the 87th Psalm and how, you know, Rastafari connects, not only, I should say, Haile Selassie with that psalm, but the, you know, Zion, and because he talks about his foundation is in the holy mountains, and Rastafari will tell you it's Zion, you know, holy mountains of Zion. In fact, yes, the Psalms is talking about Zion, because he says the Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwelling place of Jacob. So Brother Muta Baruka is of the opinion that, well, you know, Rastaban has taken this to heart now and have somehow turned Ethiopia, I guess, into Zion and tried to fit Haile Selassie into that Psalms. And he's talking about David. He himself, Muta Baruka, has visited Zion, and he went there on a plane himself and Tony Rebel. So he goes into that, and he expresses himself. But I just want us to take it in. Of course, you don't know our respect to the elder. I just want us to take it in, and let's see if we can make sense of his interpretation thereof. Because it's a serious argument that he's putting forward. And of course, he's of the opinion that Rastaman in general are seriously misled with their concepts, with their outlooks, and their beliefs in many aspects. And hey, I for sure can't disagree with him when it comes to that. With exactly what, he might have a little different outlook, but for sure, a lot of us, we kind of beyond the realms of sanity, you know, with how we think. I mean, one's accused me of the same thing. One's accused Bobo Shanti in general. That's why you see we come and clear things up. Even that which sounds miraculous and mystic, we still show you why it could just be reality, you know. But anyway, I want to get into that right now, so just get yourself comfortable. We're going to be hearing from the good brother Mutabaruka. Where is he?
And apparently...
Okay, there he is. So we're going to be going to that in a few moments, and we're going to be talking about, let's say, all things Zion. You understand? All right, so just get your heavens nice before we touch that. Yeah.